A shiny new Snapdragon 8s Gen 3 has entered the chat and it's gonna bring the POCO F6 to new heights, right? Or is it? We're gonna break down the benchmarks and real gaming scenarios today, which includes the also shiny new Wuthering Waves. So watch on to see if this phone is worth your money. Let's get started. Selamat pagi! Good morning everyone, Kenneth here and welcome to my gaming review of the POCO F6. This time I got to check out the non-pro version, which you can buy at a crazy price point, very close to 300 bucks with the discount code in the description. But basically it's available in two configs, 8 plus 256 and 12 plus 512 gigabytes, which I have here. This is around 50 bucks more expensive, but still, if you ask me, amazing value. Now, as always, you're getting my own honest opinion here, and although I'm not the first to upload the POCO F6 review, I really appreciate you watching and I hope this video will be helpful. Also, it would really help me if you use the affiliate links in the description to buy any stuff that you need, because I may get a small commission at no extra cost to you. With that said, let's get started with the synthetic benchmarks now, and starting with Antutu, I noticed something very interesting. You see, at a bit over 1.4 million, the POCO F6 is not much faster than the POCO X6 Pro we reviewed before, which brings the question, why would you pick one over the other? Well, I think it's the perfect time to tell you that synthetic benchmarks does not tell the whole story, which is why I always thoroughly test these phones to game on my daily use. But still, in terms of Antutu score, it's very impressive that today we're spending less money than the POCO F5 Pro last year and still get better performance across the board. Sure, the F6 Pro is still faster with its 8 Gen 2, but again, it's not too much at around 1.6 million. Although I have to mention that the GPU pulls ahead quite a bit more there, which brings that sweet FPS boost. Although I have to test one myself to be sure, I just don't have one to test right now. But let's move on to 3D Mark, which is the graphics test now. And the best run I got here is a touch over 5,000 on Solar Bay test, which incorporates ray tracing. And on Geekbench 6, the POCO F6 got a bit over 1900 on single core and 4700 on multi-core. This basically means the POCO F6 actually sweeps the floor, performing better than the X6 Pro. Even the F5 Pro by quite significant margin. This uses the 8 Plus Gen 1, although it's not quite the level of the latest and greatest like 8 Gen 2 or 8 Gen 3 here, which is very much understandable. Now, synthetic benchmarks aside, let's get into our first game, Mobile Legends. Basically the lightest game in the list, although still quite demanding because we'll run it at maxed out 120 FPS. Also, with all the tests, I put the AC on, so the room will be around 25 degrees Celsius. You can see the screen refresh rate on the top left and the real-time FPS in the middle graph. And I always start the test from a cool and fully charged phone, so we can see how much battery is used for each game. Alright, so getting back to the game, here I thought I would get a rock solid 120 FPS like basically every other phone. And that's mostly what we got until 13 minutes 50 seconds mark, where suddenly you'll see a yellow bar in the mostly green FPS graph. I know it's quite blurry in the shot because I kept on pulling the phone closer during fight, so I'm very sorry, but basically the phone reaches a breaking point at 46 degrees Celsius on the chip side, where the game limits the FPS to 90 until the temperature goes back down, and then ramps it up back to 120. In the first 10 minutes, I was ready to say that this is better than the X6 Pro for sure, but then this thing happened. And you'll see after around 15 minutes, the phone will fight between 120 and 90 FPS and eventually stuck at 90 FPS until the end of the match. And in real life gaming, you won't play for just once, right? So this will persist for many matches after, and it's actually quite a letdown to me. To be honest with you, I didn't notice this while playing because 90 FPS is still locked, so the frame time is very consistent and the game still feels very smooth. POCO also did a very good job designing the ice loop vapor chamber cooling, and basically that means it's never burning hot to the touch, it's just warm everywhere. But yeah, we finished the 17-minute session with 7% battery usage and an estimate of 17% per hour of gaming. You'll see why it's on the lighter side as we move to the next games. So yeah, let's check out the next one, Call of Duty Warfare, which is very graphically demanding as the X6 Pro quickly dropped to below 40 FPS even with the mid visual quality. This time though, the game has been updated with more concise setting, and moving forward, I'll test with smoother gameplay preset which prioritizes FPS FPS, which is the most important thing in shooter games. This time, the result is actually much better. We're seeing a solid 60 FPS throughout the Mobile Royale gameplay, which I'll be honest, I completely suck at and I didn't play for a whole 10 minutes there, so please just don't mind the footage. But throughout the match, the temperature stays around 42 to 44 degrees Celsius, which means there's no throttling going on. Now, after losing in the Mobile Royale, I quickly jumped over to the Killstreak Roulette mode, which is more familiar to me, and the phone was hovering around 44 degrees but plays at a solid 60 FPS, which is amazing. But again, I'm sorry for the blurry shot here because I kept on pulling the phone to my face, but around the 9 minutes mark, we actually reached 46 degrees on the chip, and then the temperatures just kept on rising without any sign of throttling. It's still 60 FPS. At around 11 minutes, we're at 47 degrees, and we finished the game on 13 minutes mark at almost 48 degrees Celsius. Ouch. Now, to POCO's defense, the outside of the phone is only at 43.6 degrees top and 40 degrees bottom. Again, showcasing the capability of the cooling system. And with around 13 minutes of playing CoD Warfare, we use 6% battery with an estimate of 21% battery usage per hour. I think we pushed the phone quite hard, but I just can't help to wonder, when will the phone throttle if I kept on playing for longer? Maybe we'll check it out next. Now, moving on to one of my favorite game next. This is Honkai Star Rail. As always, we started off with a cool-ish phone and we set the setting at very high preset, changed the frame rate to 60 FPS, so practically maxed out here. And we finally are seeing frame rate fluctuations between 50 to 60 FPS. Very rarely dropping down to the 40s, but this is still very solid performance compared to the X6 Pro that drops frames much more frequently, even down to the 30s. But one thing you can't fight is heat, and as usual, the F6 does heat up considerably by the end of the fight. I was just finishing my energy and it took only like 5 minutes and we're already close to 45 degrees on the chip. Granted, with this game, we started off with a little bit over 40 degrees, but still, for the phone to be pushed that high in such a short time means that this game is pushing the phone quite hard. But of course, in this game, you won't be fighting all the time because game resource is limited. So as many requested before, we'll take a stroll at Penacony's Golden Hour. And as you can see here, the game straight up limits to 30 FPS. There are some little fluctuation, but generally it still feels smooth, even while looking around and flying with Firefly's technique. But notice that as we move on into one of the alleys where the number of NPC decreases, we can see the frame rate rising up to the 40s, and eventually when we arrive all the way inside, we are back up to the 50-60 FPS range because there's just no one around. And continuing to do some quests here, actually we see the rise in temperature maxing out at 46.6 degrees. But keep in mind that this is on the chip level because by the end of the 10-minute session, the phone is at 43 degrees top and 40 degrees bottom with 4% battery usage and a whopping 26% battery usage per hour, which shows the game is pushing the phone hard. Now, getting back to the temperature, this phone reminds me of the late POCO phones like the F4 GT and X4 GT, which was very warm but not alarmingly hot. And you bet we can squeeze much more performance if we cool the phone down, like with this magnetic fan. And this fan is actually from the Infinix GT20 Pro, which I cannot wait to share more with you, so subscribe to not miss this one. Alright, the last two games we're checking out now are basically some of the heaviest AAA games for mobile phones. And let's start with Genshin Impact first. We put the setting on highest preset and changed the frame rate to 60. And we'll start right away by doing the daily quests and actually exploring around Sumeru region here. We are mostly hovering around 45 to 60 FPS. The lower end is usually when we're exploring outside or fighting a number of opponents, while inside a domain or where your field of view is rather confined, like when jumping on those dreaded mushrooms that I can never finish in one try, we're finally getting some 60 FPS gameplay. But yeah, we're gonna fight some bosses now, starting with a world boss in the desert here. I was actually very pleasantly surprised to see the green bars going on a graph. It's a locked 60 FPS experience despite all the effects going on screen, maybe because there's only one enemy, and the temperatures are rising but not super high, around 44 degrees Celsius. Same thing with the weekly boss that I completely struggle because I picked the wrong elements, or maybe because I haven't played Genshin for way too long now. It's the same 60 FPS gameplay, and we're actually actually chilling at 42 to 43 degrees max, which is pretty cool. So I actually played a bit too much here, and after almost 20 minutes of gameplay, we are at 40 degrees warm for both the top and bottom part of the phone, which is very respectable. And keep in mind, you will always have a hotspot where the chip is, which is around 43 degrees Celsius here. Although you don't really touch that specific part, which is good. And also we use 8% battery here, which is under 22% battery usage per hour. Very similar to CoD Warfare, basically. But finally, let's check out Wuthering Waves. And to be honest, I wasn't ready to start another Genshin-like game, but my wife has been very kind to help me grind through everything. So right now we're approaching the end-game content where you just farm for echoes, the currencies for gacha, stuff like that. So this time, actually, I've tested in 2 different settings because I found playing with medium 45 FPS gives a good balance between smooth gameplay and comfortable temperatures. And here I'm gonna start by farming echoes that are still less than 5 stars and starting with some mini bosses. Actually, we can see that the game does not play at a constant 45 FPS during fights. They're closer to 30, at best 40 FPS, only when the fight ends do the game run at 45 FPS. Similarly, on world exploration, the frame rate is below 40 FPS unless I'm flying with the birdie echo. And you can see the pattern here. Whatever we do, whether it's a bigger boss fight or tacit field farming, everything happens close to 30 FPS, while the temperature slowly rises to 44.5 degrees tops, which we see by the end of the 10 minutes gameplay. I have to say one thing though, sure, the phone doesn't go to 45 FPS often, so it's actually going to be better if you put the phone at medium 30 FPS to lower the temperature even more. But still, after the test, we got 40 degrees Celsius at the top and bottom of the phone with 3% battery usage and just under 22% per hour. Very similar results to Genshin Impact. But I want to show you what happens if we max out the setting with the advanced preset and 60 FPS frame rate. This is done right after the medium setting, so the phone is still warm. Basically, the worst case scenario for this game, and to no one's surprise, the game just didn't play near 60 FPS at all. Doing mini puzzles only gets you 30 FPS. Even we can start to see the phone dropping below 30 for brief moments. And the same thing happens for exploring the map with Inverno Rider's bike or fighting some smaller enemies. It's a 30 FPS show with a bit more frame drops below it. Nothing too severe, but the temperature kept on rising. Albeit slowly, that by the end of the 5 minutes extra gameplay, we're now at 45.5 degrees on the chip side. But on the phone itself, it was quite significant change because the top part is now 42.5 degrees, while the bottom part is 40 degrees. If calculated, a 10-minute gameplay at this setting would use 4 to 5% battery, which is just a touch more than the medium setting, but we're getting into Honkai style territory now, and if calculated, would use upwards of 24% per hour. Okay, I feel like this video is long enough as it is, so I'm not going to cram in the other parts of the phone, like the screen, the build quality, and the camera. That's gonna be in the next part, so make sure to subscribe, and heck, I even wanted to show you how it performs with a cooling fan, which is going to be another video by itself. So is the POCO F6 worth the extra few couple bucks compared to the X6 Pro? I mean, the price isn't even $100 apart. So the answer is a definite yes. You're getting a flagship level chip here, which means day-to-day tasks are going to fly. And cooler fans these days are not too expensive. You can even get the clip-on one, so you don't have to bother with sticking magnetic plates like this. But yeah, I'll put my review of the X6 Pro here and also the follow-up video if you come from the future. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Kenneth. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.